Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive into something absolutely fascinating, the role Freemasons played in the American Revolution. And let me tell you, it's way more complex and honestly way more contradictory than you might think.
So you've probably heard this one, right? Maybe in a movie or a book. The idea that the entire American Revolution was all just a big secret Masonic plot hatched in secret lodges. But is that what really happened? What does the history actually say? Well, let's dig in and find out.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll tackle that Masonic Revolution myth head on. Then we'll get into the messy reality of a brotherhood that was totally divided. We'll look at patriots, loyalists, even traitors. We'll ask if those Masonic bonds were stronger than war. We'll even touch on the struggle for inclusion. And finally, we'll wrap up with the legacy of these divided brothers.
So the myth goes something like this. The Boston Tea Party, Masonic plot. Paul Revere's ride, coordinated by Masons. The Declaration of Independence, basically written in a lodge meeting. It's a neat, tidy story where a secret society is pulling all the strings for one single goal. And yeah, it's a great story, but it leaves out the really messy, complicated truth.
You often hear this quote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." People connect it to Edmund Burke, who was a Mason, and they use it to say, see, that's why the Masons, who are supposed to be peaceful, had to fight. It makes it sound like a really simple black and white choice. But, and this is a big but, for the Freemasons living through this, the path forward was, well, it was anything but clear.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, because as soon as you look at the actual facts, that whole neat conspiracy theory just falls apart. Freemasonry wasn't some united revolutionary force, far from it. It was a brotherhood completely split down the middle, with Masons on both sides, sometimes working directly against each other.
Let's take the First Continental Congress back in 1774. You'd think the biggest firebrands, the guys shouting for independence at the top of their lungs, you'd think they'd be Masons, right? Nope. Guys like Patrick Henry, John Adams, Samuel Adams, none of them were Masons. And get this, some of the key figures trying to hit the brakes, the ones pushing for compromise to avoid a war, they were all prominent Masons. Kind of flips the script, doesn't it? I mean, you had Masons like Edmund Burke over in London arguing in Parliament for America's rights. And then here in Philadelphia, you have this guy, James Galloway. He's a Mason, a good friend of Ben Franklin, but he's also a loyalist. And he comes up with this brilliant idea, a plan of union. It was a genius compromise, really. It would have created a colonial legislature and given the colonies a real voice. And the crazy thing is, it almost worked. It was defeated by just one vote. One vote. The entire war could have been avoided. Okay, so let's zoom in a bit and look at the people, because this isn't really a story about an organization. It's about individual guys making these gut-wrenching decisions that sometimes meant fighting their own Masonic brothers.
On the Patriot side, you can't get much bigger than Dr. Joseph Warren. This guy wasn't just a Mason. He was the Grand Master for a whole branch of Masonry in North America. He was also the top revolutionary leader in Massachusetts, running a huge spy ring. Seriously, some people think he used his Masonic network to build it. He was all in, and he paid the ultimate price, dying at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And then, you've got Benedict Arnold. Yep, also a proud and active Freemason. And for a while, he was a rock star of the Revolution, a true hero at places like Fort Ticonderoga and Saratoga. But he felt like Congress was constantly disrespecting him. And the last straw? The alliance with France. He hated the French. So all that bitterness boiled over, and he did the unthinkable, becoming America's most famous traitor.
But wait, it gets even more complicated. You remember Dr. Joseph Warren, the Patriot hero? After he died, Benedict Arnold, the guy who was already starting to think about treason, personally gave $500 to support Warren's kids. That was a ton of money back then. He did it because they were Masonic brothers. Just think about that. He's holding on to this deep fraternal bond, this act of charity, at the exact same time he's about to betray everything Warren died for. It's just, wow.
So that leads to a really big question, right? If you've got Masons on both sides of the battlefield, literally trying to kill each other, did that Masonic bond even matter? And you know what's wild? The answer is yes, it absolutely did.
Okay, first, you gotta get your head around just how many Masons there were, especially in the Army's leadership. Think about George Washington's top generals. Out of 74 of them, we know for a fact at least 33 were Freemasons. That's nearly half his command staff. Washington himself was a huge supporter. He thought it made his officer corps stronger and more unified.
And it wasn't just the generals. The regular soldiers had them too. Both the American and the British armies had these military lodges that would literally travel with the troops and meet in the camps. We're talking at least 10 on the American side and over 30 on the British side. So you have this incredible situation where guys are preparing for battle, and then in the evening, they're meeting as brothers under the same oaths as the guys in the camp across the field.
There's this one story that just says it all. In 1779, American troops capture a British unit, and they take the stuff from their military lodge, their charter and ritual items. But the American general, a Mason named Samuel H. Parsons, he immediately sends it all back to the enemy prisoners under a white flag. And his letter basically says, look, our countries are at war, but as Masons, we're disarmed of that resentment. We are still brethren. I mean, can you imagine? That's an ideal that's somehow surviving in the absolute middle of a war.
But, and this is another huge but, that ideal of brotherhood didn't extend to everyone. American Masonry had a massive blind spot, and it was race. This became a whole other conflict inside the fraternity, a division that, honestly, is still felt today.
So let's go back to Boston, right before the shooting started at Lexington and Concord. There's this incredible guy, Prince Hall, a free black man and an abolitionist. He and 14 other men want to become Freemasons. They go to the local American lodges in Boston, and they get rejected. But they find a lodge that will take them, an Irish military lodge, part of the British Army stationed there. So on March 6, 1775, they become the first known black Masons in America. And who made them Masons? The very British soldiers they were about to go to war with. The irony is just staggering.
Okay, so the war ends. Prince Hall and his brothers fought for America. So they go to the new Grand Lodge of Massachusetts for an official charter, and crickets. They're just flat out ignored. But Hall doesn't give up. He goes straight to the source, the Grand Lodge of England. Their first payment gets lost. They have to send another one. It takes 3 years, but finally, in 1787, they get their charter. They're now African Lodge number 459. But even then, the white American lodges won't recognize them, and London basically forgets about them. So in 1827, they did exactly what the American colonies did to England. They declared independence and created their own sovereign Prince Hall Grand Lodge. So when you put it all together, what do you get? The real story here isn't that Freemasonry caused the revolution. It's that Freemasonry was a mirror of the revolution. It reflected everything: the high-flying ideals, the deep, bitter divisions, and all the painful contradictions of this new nation being born.
And these splits didn't just go away after the war. There was a big push to create one single national Grand Lodge for the U.S., but it failed. They even asked George Washington to be the first Grand Master, and he politely said no thanks. The infighting between different Masonic factions just kept going. So what happened? American Masonry ended up being this decentralized system of state-by-state Grand Lodges, which, if you think about it, sounds a lot like the whole states' rights debate that was shaping the country.
And if you need one story to show how petty and bitter things got, look no further than Benjamin Franklin's funeral. We're talking about maybe the most famous Freemason on the planet at that point. When he died, the streets of Philadelphia were packed, but his own Grand Lodge in Pennsylvania, they refused to give him Masonic funeral honors. Why? Because of internal politics. They were from a rival faction, and they basically saw him as the enemy. They denied one of the greatest Masons in history his final honors over some internal squabble. It's just unbelievable. So in the end, that whole conspiracy theory just misses the point. It misses the much more fascinating, much more human story. This wasn't some shadowy group controlling events. This was a brotherhood that was supposed to be all about harmony, getting torn to shreds by a war among its own people. It was a perfect microcosm of the revolution itself, a fight for freedom that was also, literally, a war among brothers.
I mean, think about it. You had diehard patriot Masons like Joseph Warren. You had committed Loyalist Masons like James Galloway. And you had Masons like Edmund Burke stuck in the middle, trying to stop the whole thing. They weren't one thing. They were a reflection of everybody else in all that messy complexity.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. This story, it's not really just about history. It's about what happens to our best ideals, ideals like brotherhood and unity, when they get put to the ultimate test by political division and war. And that's a question that, well, it never really goes away, does it?